It wasn't supposed to go this way. In a city known for its resilience and culture, one black woman in Atlanta stepped into a courtroom for a minor parking ticket dispute, only to expose one of the most shocking cases of judicial bias the city had ever seen. This story is about Monica Bryant, a brilliant federal prosecutor who found herself targeted by a powerful judge. What happens next reveals deep cracks in the system and how one person's courage can ignite a movement for change. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today. And if this story of justice, resilience, and bravery resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more powerful stories like this. It was just another morning in Atlanta. The sun was slowly creeping over the city skyline, casting long, golden shadows across the streets as life stirred to motion. Inside a modest yet immaculately kept apartment in the heart of downtown Atlanta, Monica Bryant moved with practiced efficiency. Everything about Monica's morning reflected who she was: disciplined, meticulous, and composed. Her bedroom was tidy, her desk organized, and the faint scent of coffee wafted through the air. At 38, Monica had built an impressive career as a federal prosecutor, known for her sharp legal mind and relentless pursuit of justice. Yet, despite her professional achievements, she preferred to keep a low profile. Her decision wasn't born out of modesty, but necessity. She knew too well what it was like to be underestimated, dismissed, or even targeted because of her race and gender. This particular morning was supposed to be simple, even mundane. A quick appearance at the Atlanta Municipal Court to dispute a parking ticket she believed had been issued in error. She had the evidence ready: photos on her phone and copies of city parking ordinances neatly printed and stapled together. It wasn't exactly the type of case that called for Monica's usual tenacity, but she was a firm believer in principle. Right was right, and wrong was wrong. Her slim figure was wrapped in a tailored gray blazer paired with navy slacks. She smoothed her natural curls back into a bun, pausing briefly in front of the mirror. She had only started wearing her natural hair a few years ago, deciding it was time to embrace every part of herself, regardless of society's expectations. She grabbed her travel mug of coffee and was halfway out the door when her phone buzzed. "David Johnson," the screen read. She sighed lightly. David was her closest colleague and one of the few people she trusted completely at the office. He was the type of lawyer who could argue circles around anyone, and the two of them often worked together on Atlanta's most high-profile cases. If David was calling this early, it could only mean one thing: trouble. Monica slid her finger across the screen and answered. "Morning, David. What's going on?" "Monica, I hate to bother you, but I need your eyes on something." His tone was hurried, almost anxious. "The Anderson corruption trial just blew up. The defense filed a new motion overnight, and it's bad. Real bad." Monica instantly felt her pulse quicken. The Anderson case had rocked Atlanta's political world for months, exposing allegations of bribery, fraud, and misuse of public funds by some of the city's most powerful officials. Monica had played a pivotal role in building the prosecution's case, and now, on the brink of trial, she couldn't afford to let anything slip through the cracks. "What's in the motion?" she asked, already moving toward her laptop. "Claims of tainted evidence," David said, exhaling sharply. "They're saying we mishandled documents, and if the judge sides with them, it could derail the entire case." Monica bit her lip as she powered on her computer. "Send it to me. I'll look at it now." She glanced at the clock on her kitchen wall. It was already 8:05. She'd planned to leave by 8:15 to ensure she'd have plenty of time to find parking and make it to the municipal court by her 9 a.m. appearance. But the Anderson case couldn't wait. David emailed her the motion, and within minutes, Monica was poring over it. The arguments were flimsy, but the defense had strategically twisted procedural rules to their advantage. Monica drafted notes furiously, cross referencing evidence logs and case law. As she worked, the time slipped away unnoticed. When she finally glanced at her phone, her heart sank. It was already 8:45. Damn, she muttered under her breath, quickly saving her notes. She called David as she grabbed her car keys and bag. "I've got a response half written," she said. "I'll finish it as soon as I'm done at court." "Thanks, Monica. You're a lifesaver," David replied. She hurried out of her apartment, heading to the parking garage where her black Lexus was waiting. The streets of Atlanta were already bustling with the chaos of a weekday morning. Traffic crawled, and the clock seemed to tick faster with every passing minute. By the time Monica pulled into the municipal court parking lot, it was 9:10 a.m. She quickly parked, grabbed her files, and walked briskly toward the courthouse. Inside the courtroom, Judge Harold Peterson was already presiding. A tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 60s, Judge Peterson had a reputation for running his courtroom with an iron fist. His stern face, framed by thinning white hair, scanned the room with sharp, calculating eyes. The courtroom itself was packed. Defendants, lawyers, and clerks shuffled nervously as cases were called one by one. Traffic violations, minor disputes, and parking tickets dominated the docket. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Monica entered quietly. The judge's gaze immediately snapped toward her. "You," he said, pointing a gavel in her direction. "Step forward." Monica froze for a moment, surprised by the sharpness in his voice. She approached the podium, standing tall and composed despite the stares of the other people in the room. "Name?" Judge Peterson demanded. "Monica Bryant, Your Honor." He flipped through the docket, his expression darkening. "Ms. Bryant, your case was scheduled for 9 a.m. It is now 9:15. Do you think this court revolves around your schedule?" Monica opened her mouth to explain, but the judge didn't give her the chance. "I don't care about your excuses," he said, his voice rising. "This is a court of law, not a casual appointment you can waltz into whenever you feel like it." Monica's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. She glanced around the room and noticed other latecomers seated without issue. A white man in a suit, who had arrived moments before her, was flipping through his phone as if nothing had happened. "I apologize for my tardiness, Your Honor," Monica said calmly. "I was delayed by an urgent matter." "I'm not interested in excuses," Judge Peterson interrupted, banging his gavel for emphasis. "This court does not tolerate disrespect. I am fining you $1,000 for contempt." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Monica felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her, but she kept her expression neutral. This wasn't the first time she'd faced prejudice masked as authority, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. "Understood, Your Honor," she said simply. The judge leaned back in his chair, clearly expecting her to argue or protest. When she didn't, he seemed momentarily taken aback, but he quickly moved on. "Next case," he barked, dismissing Monica as if she were an afterthought. Monica returned to her seat, her mind racing. The fine wasn't what bothered her most. It was the pattern of behavior she'd witnessed in the brief moments she'd been in the courtroom. The latecomers who hadn't been reprimanded, the subtle condescension in the judge's tone when addressing her, and the lack of acknowledgement when she tried to explain herself. "This isn't just about me," she thought, her hands tightening around her file. She began quietly taking notes, documenting every detail: the judge's words, his treatment of other defendants, and the racial dynamics in the room. Monica had spent years building airtight cases as a prosecutor, and she knew how to spot a systemic problem when she saw one. As the morning wore on, Monica watched and listened carefully. Each interaction between Judge Peterson and the defendants painted a clearer picture. Her initial frustration turned into determination. By the time she left the courtroom, the seeds of a plan were already forming in her mind. The courtroom was bustling with activity, but Monica sat quietly, a storm brewing behind her calm expression. Her late arrival had already set her apart, not just in the judge's eyes, but in the atmosphere of the room. She had expected a routine morning, a quick dispute over a wrongly issued parking ticket, and then she'd move on to more pressing matters. Instead, what she witnessed that day began to feel far from routine. As the session continued, Monica couldn't help but notice patterns. They weren't glaring or obvious to the untrained eye, but for someone like her, who had spent years analyzing facts and digging into inconsistencies, they were as clear as day. The first thing she noticed was the way Judge Peterson addressed defendants. His tone shifted depending on who was standing before him. A white man in his late 30s had arrived shortly after her, wearing a tailored navy suit and loafers that gleamed under the courtroom's fluorescent lights. He explained that he had been delayed by an unexpected traffic jam on the downtown connector, a story that Judge Peterson accepted with an understanding nod. "Next time, plan ahead," the judge said, his voice neutral. He dismissed the man with a small fine of $25, barely a slap on the wrist. Minutes later, a young black woman stepped forward. She was dressed in a modest dress, her hair neatly styled. But the moment she opened her mouth to explain her tardiness, the air in the courtroom shifted. "Your Honor," she began nervously, holding a bundle of papers in her hands. "I was late because my bus..." "Stop right there," Judge Peterson cut her off, his tone sharp. He leaned forward, his expression cold. "This isn't the place for excuses. If you can't respect the court's time, don't expect the court to respect yours." The woman's face fell as the judge fined her $500, the same amount he had imposed on Monica. Monica clenched her jaw, taking in the stark contrast between the two interactions. She began documenting everything. Her legal pad, initially brought to organize her own parking case, quickly filled with notes. She wrote down each fine, each comment, and even the body language Judge Peterson displayed. By the time a Latino man in his 20s stepped forward, Monica could almost predict what would happen. He had been cited for parking in a fire lane, a violation he explained was due to a family emergency at the hospital. Judge Peterson's response was scathing. "Do you think the rules don't apply to you?" he snapped, his voice echoing through the room. "That's a $750 fine. Maybe that'll teach you to think twice before breaking the law." Monica felt her pulse quicken. The judge didn't even attempt to mask his disdain. She glanced around the courtroom, noting how the other defendants sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact with the bench. They had clearly witnessed these patterns before. By the end of the morning session, Monica had a detailed log of what she had seen. She had counted 11 defendants in total. Of the 5 who were white, none had been fined more than $50, and most had received little more than verbal warnings. The other 6 defendants, all black or Latino, had been fined between $500 and $1,000 and subjected to lectures that bordered on humiliation. The bailiff, a middle-aged black man standing to the side of the courtroom, caught her eye once or twice during the session. His expression was unreadable, but Monica could sense that he, too, had noticed the disparities playing out before them. As the courtroom emptied, Monica approached the clerk's desk. The clerk, a thin woman in her late 40s with sharp features and a clipped tone, barely glanced up from her computer. "Can I help you?" the clerk asked, her voice impatient. "Yes," Monica replied, her tone measured. "I'd like to file a formal motion to contest the fine issued against me." The clerk raised an eyebrow, finally looking up. Her eyes flicked over Monica, lingering on her natural hair and the simple blazer she wore. "You a public defender or something?" Monica stiffened. The implication was clear. "No," she said calmly, reaching into her bag. She pulled out her badge and placed it on the counter, the gold emblem of the Department of Justice glinting under the fluorescent fluorescent lights. I'm a federal prosecutor. The clerk's face shifted immediately. Her eyes widened, and her lips parted slightly, as though she had been caught off guard. She quickly straightened in her chair. "Oh," she said, her tone softening. "I didn't realize." Monica didn't wait for her to finish. "I'd like a copy of the session's docket as well. If you could include the fines issued and the defendants' names, that would be great." The clerk hesitated. "I'm not sure I can." "You can," Monica said firmly, meeting the woman's gaze. "And I'd appreciate it if you didn't waste my time." The clerk nodded quickly, flustered. "Right, I'll get that for you." As Monica waited, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than her parking ticket. Something about the way Judge Peterson operated felt deliberate, calculated even. And then there was the subtle dismissal from the clerk, a reminder of the assumptions people made about her before they knew who she was. That evening, back in her apartment, Monica opened her laptop to review her notes. But before she could begin, an email from David Johnson caught her attention. The subject line read, "Urgent Anderson trial update." Monica clicked it open and skimmed through the message. Her breath caught as she reached the final paragraph. Apparently, one of the developers tied to the Anderson case had been a major donor to Judge Peterson's last election campaign. The connection wasn't widely known, at least not yet, but the implications were staggering. If Peterson's decisions on the bench were influenced by political or financial interests, it could undermine the legitimacy of every case he'd presided over. Monica leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She thought about the people she'd seen in court that morning, their tired faces, the way they seemed resigned to their fates. How many of them had been victims of a biased system? How many had suffered because of a judge who saw them not as individuals but as stereotypes? "This isn't just about me," she thought again, the phrase repeating in her mind like a mantra. The next morning, Monica returned to her office at the federal courthouse. She greeted her assistant, Angela, who handed her a thick folder of documents related to the Anderson case. "By the way," Angela said, lowering her voice, "I heard some rumors about Judge Peterson. People are saying he's selective about how he handles cases. You know what I mean?" Monica nodded grimly. She knew exactly what Angela meant. "I'm looking into it," Monica said, her voice steady. Angela gave her a knowing look. "Good. Somebody needs to." As Monica settled into her desk, she made a decision. This wasn't going to be just another day at work. She would use every resource at her disposal to dig into Judge Peterson's record. If there was a pattern of bias or misconduct, she would find it. The corruption trial was heating up, and now, with the judge's name tied to it, Monica realized that the two issues might be connected. What had started as a simple parking ticket dispute was quickly spiraling into something much larger, a ticking bomb waiting to explode. And Monica was determined to be the one to light the fuse. Monica Bryant sat at her desk late into the evening, the steady hum of Atlanta's traffic audible through her cracked office window. The chaos of the day at the municipal courthouse replayed in her mind like a bad dream. She hadn't expected to feel this level of anger over a simple parking ticket dispute, but what she had witnessed had been a stark reminder of something far bigger, a system tilted against people who looked like her. The court clerk had finally provided Monica with the session's docket and fine records. Now, she laid the papers across her desk, analyzing them with the precision she applied to federal cases. Patterns were beginning to emerge, confirming what she'd suspected in that courtroom. She reached for her phone and dialed her assistant, Angela. "I need you to help me pull some records," Monica said without preamble. "Of course," Angela replied. "What kind of records?" "Judge Harold Peterson. I want a complete history of his courtroom decisions for the last 5 years. Fines, contempt charges, dismissals, everything. If it's public record, I want it." Angela hesitated. "This sounds big, Monica. Are you sure you want to go after a sitting judge?" Monica took a deep breath, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. "Yes, I'm sure. There's something wrong here, and I need to know just how deep it goes." Angela didn't question her further. "I'll start first thing tomorrow." As Monica hung up, she stared at the papers in front of her. This wasn't just about a judge with a bad temper. It was about a system that allowed people like Judge Peterson to operate unchecked, their biases shaping the lives of countless defendants. Monica knew the risks, but she also knew she couldn't turn a blind eye. The next morning, Monica arrived at her office early, armed with coffee and determination. Angela had already begun digging through public records, and by mid-morning, she handed Monica a thick stack of files. "You were right," Angela said, her expression grim. "There's a pattern." Monica sifted through the documents, her frustration mounting with every page. The data was damning. Black defendants were fined, on average, 4 times more than white defendants for the same infractions. Over 70% of contempt charges issued by Judge Peterson targeted minorities, primarily Black and Latino individuals. Cases involving white defendants were far more likely to end with reduced fines or dismissals, often with little explanation. One set of figures particularly caught Monica's attention. In cases where defendants requested leniency due to financial hardship, white defendants were granted payment plans or reduced fines nearly 60% of the time. For Black defendants, that number dropped to less than 10%. Monica's hands trembled slightly as she read through the files. The numbers weren't just statistics, they were evidence of a system that crushed the vulnerable while sparing the privileged. Angela cleared her throat, breaking the silence. "There's more," she said, handing Monica another folder. Inside were campaign finance reports for Judge Peterson's last election. At first glance, they seemed ordinary, but as Monica examined them closely, a troubling picture emerged. Several of the largest donations came from companies tied to Atlanta's elite developers, including one notorious figure, Gregory Langston. Langston's name was one Monica knew well. His company, Langston Enterprises, was at the center of the Anderson corruption trial, a high-profile case involving bribery and fraud within the city's zoning department. The connections were tenuous, but they raised serious questions about Peterson's impartiality. "Angela," Monica said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her, "we're going to need more than this. I want to cross-reference Peterson's rulings with any cases involving Langston Enterprises or their subsidiaries. Something tells me this isn't a coincidence." That evening, Monica sat alone in her apartment, the files spread across her dining table. The faint glow of the city's skyline lit the room as she sifted through the documents. Her mind wandered to her own experiences. As a young Black woman navigating the legal world, Monica had faced her share of obstacles. She thought back to her first year at law school. "You don't belong here," a professor had told her after a class debate where she'd challenged his outdated views. It was a comment that had stung but hadn't surprised her. She'd grown up hearing subtle and not so subtle reminders that she had to work twice as hard to be seen as equal. Even after graduating at the top of her class and earning a position as a federal prosecutor, the microaggressions never stopped. From the defense attorneys who underestimated her abilities to the colleagues who assumed she'd gotten her job because of affirmative action, Monica had spent her entire career proving she was more than capable. Now, as she looked at the records in front of her, Monica felt that same fire reignite. This wasn't just about exposing one judge's bias. It was about confronting a system that had been stacked against her and countless others for generations. She pulled out her notebook and began organizing her findings. Each statistic, each case, each connection between Judge Peterson and Atlanta's elite became another piece of the puzzle. By the end of the week, Monica's investigation had begun to attract attention. She had shared her findings with a trusted colleague, Marcus Reed, a civil rights attorney who had spent years fighting for racial justice in Atlanta. "This is huge," Marcus said after reviewing the data. "If this goes public, it could shake the entire system." "I need your help," Monica said. "This isn't just about Peterson. It's about the culture that allows people like him to thrive. I need to make sure this sticks." Marcus nodded. "You've got it. I'll reach out to some of the local civil rights groups. They'll want to be part of this." Within days, word began to spread. Activists, lawyers, and community leaders rallied behind Monica, offering support and resources. The Atlanta Justice Alliance, a prominent civil rights organization, even offered to host a press conference to bring attention to her findings. But not everyone was supportive. Monica began receiving anonymous emails and phone calls, some of which were overtly threatening. One voicemail warned her to stay in her lane, while another accused her of trying to tear down a respected judge for her own gain. It was during this time that Monica received an anonymous tip. The caller, a man who refused to identify himself, claimed to have information about a high-profile case Peterson had presided over years ago. He suppressed evidence, the caller said, his voice low and hurried. It was a big case, someone important. I can't say more, but look into it. Before Monica could ask any questions, the line went dead. The tip haunted her as she continued her work. She began combing through Peterson's past rulings, searching for anything that matched the caller's description. It wasn't long before she found it, a murder trial from 5 years earlier involving the son of a wealthy Atlanta businessman. The trial had ended with an acquittal, despite overwhelming evidence pointing to the defendant's guilt. As Monica dug deeper, she uncovered troubling details about the case. Key pieces of evidence had been deemed inadmissible by Peterson, decisions that legal experts had criticized at the time, but which had largely been ignored by the media. The more Monica uncovered, the clearer it became that Peterson's biases weren't just a personal failing, they were part of a much larger problem. By the end of the chapter, Monica's fully immersed in her investigation, her determination stronger than ever. With the support of civil rights groups and mounting evidence of Peterson's misconduct, she prepares to take her findings public. But as the storm brews around her, Monica knows that exposing the truth won't come without consequences. The system she's fighting against is powerful, and the people she's challenging won't go down without a fight. The morning of the press conference was unusually still, as though the city itself was holding its breath. Monica Bryant stood in front of the mirror in her modest downtown apartment, adjusting the collar of her black blazer. Her expression was calm, but her hands betrayed her nerves, shaking slightly as she pinned her badge to her lapel. This wasn't the type of public spotlight she sought, but she knew it was necessary. Behind her, on the dining table, were stacks of meticulously prepared documents, case records, statistical analyses, and personal testimonies. They were the product of weeks of tireless work, the culmination of her investigation into Judge Harold Peterson's courtroom. Today, she would present her findings to the world, a move she hoped would spark the change Atlanta desperately needed. Angela, her assistant, arrived promptly at 8 a.m., a steaming cup of coffee in hand. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her tone a mix of concern and encouragement. Monica nodded, though the weight of the day pressed heavily on her shoulders. "I have to be." The press conference was held at the Atlanta Justice Alliance's downtown headquarters, a modest building that served as a hub for local civil rights activists. By the time Monica arrived, the room was already buzzing with reporters, activists, and community leaders. Cameras were positioned in the back, and microphones lined the podium at the front of the room. Marcus Reed, the civil rights attorney who had become one of Monica's staunchest allies, greeted her at the door. "We've got a full house," he said with a faint smile. "People are listening, Monica. This is your moment." Monica took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium. The chatter in the room died down as she adjusted the microphone. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady despite the nerves churning in her stomach. "My name is Monica Bryant, and I serve as a federal prosecutor in Atlanta. I'm here today not just as a lawyer, but as a citizen who believes in the promise of justice, a promise that I fear has been broken in our city's courts." She paused, allowing her words to settle over the room before continuing. "Over the past several weeks, I have conducted an investigation into the practices of Judge Harold Peterson, who has served on the municipal court bench for over a decade. What I have uncovered is deeply troubling." Monica outlined her findings methodically, her years in the courtroom lending a sharp precision to her delivery. She presented statistics showing the racial disparities in Peterson's rulings, how black defendants were fined 4 times more than their white counterparts, how contempt charges overwhelmingly targeted minorities, and how leniency was rarely extended to people of color. The room grew quieter as Monica shared specific examples. A black single mother fined $1,000 for a minor infraction, while a white businessman received a warning for the same offense. A young Latino man denied a payment plan despite clear evidence of financial hardship, and countless cases where Peterson's tone and treatment varied drastically based on the defendant's race. "The numbers don't lie," Monica said, her voice firm. "This is not an isolated issue. This is a pattern that undermines the very foundation of our justice system." When she finished, the room erupted into a flurry of activity. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and hashtags like number justice in Atlanta and number courtroom bias began trending on social media within minutes. Monica stepped away from the podium, her hands trembling slightly, but her resolve remained unshaken. The fallout was swift. By the end of the day, Monica's phone was inundated with messages, some from colleagues offering support, others from strangers thanking her for speaking out. But not all the responses were positive. That evening, Monica received an anonymous email with a subject line, "You've gone too far." The body of the message was brief but chilling. "Back off, or you'll regret it." Monica stared at the screen, her stomach tightening. She had expected pushback, but the threat felt personal, invasive. The next morning, as she arrived at her office, she was greeted by Assistant DA Tyler Mason, a man whose polished demeanor rarely masked his opportunistic nature. He leaned casually against her office door, his arms crossed. "Monica," he said, his tone unnervingly smooth. "Can we talk?" She set her bag down and gestured for him to enter, though she kept her guard up. Tyler closed the door behind him and took a seat across from her desk. "Look," he began, "I respect what you're trying to do. Really, I do. But you need to be careful." Monica raised an eyebrow. "Careful of what, exactly?" Tyler hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Peterson has powerful friends. The kind of people who don't like their names dragged into the mud. If I were you, I'd think twice before pushing this any further." Monica leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "If you're here to scare me, Tyler, it's not going to work. I'm not backing down." Tyler sighed and stood, brushing imaginary dust off his tailored suit. "Suit yourself," he said, heading for the door. "Just don't say I didn't warn you." Later that day, as Monica reviewed additional case records, she received a call from an unknown number. She hesitated before answering, unsure what to expect. "Monica Bryant?" a young woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is she." "My name is Rebecca Sanders," the woman said, her voice shaky but determined. "I'm a public defender, and I've worked under Judge Peterson for the past 3 years. I think I can help you." Monica's interest piqued. "Go on." Rebecca explained that she had been keeping a private journal documenting Peterson's discriminatory practices. "At first, I didn't think much of it," she admitted. "I told myself it was just a few bad days, that maybe I was imagining things. But over time, I couldn't ignore it anymore." She described how Peterson routinely interrupted minority defendants, often refusing to let them fully explain their circumstances. She recalled instances where he dismissed evidence presented by public defenders, claiming it was irrelevant only to accept similar evidence from private attorneys representing white clients. "I've got notes, dates, case numbers," Rebecca said. "If you're willing to meet, I'll share everything with you." Monica didn't hesitate. When and where? Rebecca handed Monica a worn leather notebook during their meeting at a quiet coffee shop on Peachtree Street. Inside were meticulously detailed entries, each one painting a damning picture of Peterson's courtroom behavior. Monica spent the next week consolidating Rebecca's notes with her own findings. The result was a comprehensive report that left no room for doubt. Armed with this new evidence, Monica filed a formal complaint with the Georgia Judicial Review Board, attaching the report as well as supporting testimonies from other public defenders and former defendants. But Monica wasn't done. She also prepared to testify in the upcoming Anderson corruption trial, where Peterson's financial ties to Gregory Langston would come under scrutiny. The connection between Peterson and Atlanta's elite wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. Monica knew the risks she was taking. By stepping into the spotlight, she was challenging a system that protected its own at all costs. But she also knew this fight was bigger than her. As she finalized her testimony, she thought about the people she'd seen in Peterson's courtroom, the mother struggling to make ends meet, the young man trying to care for his family. They deserved justice, and Monica was determined to deliver it. The courtroom was packed to capacity, the air buzzing with anticipation and tension. News cameras lined the back walls, their lenses trained on the mahogany bench at the front. The case against Judge Harold Peterson had grown from whispered rumors to a full-blown public reckoning, and today was the day Atlanta would hear the truth. Monica Bryant sat at the prosecution table, her face calm, but her hands clenched tightly around the stack of papers in front of her. This was the moment she had been working toward for weeks. No, years. Everything she had endured, every microaggression, and every moment of doubt had led her to this point. As the bailiff called the court to order, the room fell silent. Judge Peterson entered through a side door, his once confident stride noticeably slower. His face was pale, his eyes darting nervously toward the crowd. He sat at the defense table, flanked by his high-powered legal team, their tailored suits and polished shoes, a stark contrast to the storm of accusations swirling around them. Monica took a deep breath. This was it. The first witness called to the stand was Rebecca Sanders, the young public defender whose detailed notes had been pivotal in exposing Peterson's discriminatory practices. Dressed in a modest navy dress, Rebecca looked small and nervous as she took the oath, but her voice was steady when she began recounting her experiences in Peterson's courtroom. For years, she said, I witnessed Judge Peterson treat minority defendants with blatant hostility. He would interrupt them, refuse to consider their evidence, and impose harsher penalties than he did for white defendants with similar charges. Rebecca's testimony was supported by her journal, which was presented as evidence. The prosecution displayed page after page of her handwritten notes, each one documenting a specific instance of bias. On March 12, 2022, Rebecca read aloud, a black defendant was fined $750 for a parking violation. Later that same day, a white defendant received a $50 fine for the same offense. The courtroom murmured as Rebecca continued, her voice unwavering despite the weight of her words. Next, Monica herself was called to testify. As she approached the stand, the room seemed to hold its breath. Dressed in a sharp gray suit, Monica radiated confidence, but inside, her heart pounded. Please state your name and occupation for the record, the prosecutor said. Monica Bryant, she replied. I am a federal prosecutor for the Northern District of Georgia. The questions came quickly, but Monica was ready. She presented the data she had painstakingly compiled, showing undeniable patterns of racial bias in Peterson's rulings. Bar graphs and spreadsheets filled the screens in the courtroom, each one more damning than the last. Over the past 5 years, Monica explained, Judge Peterson has fined black defendants an average of 4 times more than white defendants for the same infractions. In cases of contempt charges, over 70% have been issued to minority defendants. Gasps rippled through the audience as the numbers were displayed, but Monica wasn't finished. She had saved the most damning evidence for last. Your Honor, she said, turning toward the judge presiding over the hearing, I'd like to submit an audio recording taken from a session in Judge Peterson's courtroom. The recording crackled to life, filling the room with Peterson's unmistakable voice. Do you think you're special? He sneered at a black defendant. If you people can't follow simple rules, maybe you don't deserve the court's leniency. The room erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously, and several audience members shook their heads in disbelief. Monica maintained her composure, though her hands gripped the edge of the stand tightly. When the noise subsided, Monica turned back to the prosecution table and retrieved another file. I also have evidence, she said, her voice steady, that Judge Peterson suppressed key evidence in at least 3 high-profile cases, all of which benefited defendants connected to his campaign donors. As the hearing progressed, the walls began to close in on Peterson. Investigators had uncovered a series of suspicious transactions linked to his re-election campaign. Among the most damning were bribes disguised as donations from Gregory Langston, the wealthy developer implicated in the Anderson corruption trial. Emails presented during the hearing showed a clear pattern. Langston's company had funneled thousands of dollars into Peterson's campaign, and in return, Peterson had presided over cases involving Langston with what could only be described as favoritism. In one instance, Peterson had dismissed a lawsuit against Langston Enterprises, citing insufficient evidence despite overwhelming proof of wrongdoing. Under mounting pressure, Peterson's legal team tried to discredit the witnesses, but their efforts fell flat. Rebecca's notes were corroborated by other public defenders who came forward to share similar stories. Monica's data was airtight, backed by official court records, and the audio recordings left no room for doubt. By the 3rd day of the hearing, Peterson's once stoic demeanor had cracked. He sat slumped at the defense table, his face ashen, as witness after witness testified against him. Finally, as the prosecution prepared to call their last witness, Peterson's attorney stood and requested a recess. When the court reconvened an hour hour later, Peterson's attorney announced his resignation. Judge Harold Peterson has decided to step down from his position effective immediately, the attorney said, his voice strained. He will also cooperate fully with the ongoing investigation into his conduct. The announcement sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Monica allowed herself a small, satisfied smile, but she knew the fight wasn't over. Peterson's resignation was just the beginning. In the days that followed, Monica's testimony inspired a wave of action across Atlanta. Former defendants who had suffered under Peterson's rulings came forward with their own stories, flooding civil rights organizations with calls and emails. One of them was Tyrone Jenkins, a father of 3 who had been jailed for 30 days after being unable to pay a $1,000 fine for a minor traffic violation. "I always knew something wasn't right," Tyrone told a local news station, "but I didn't think anyone would believe me. Now I know I wasn't alone." Lawyers who had worked in Peterson's courtroom also began speaking out. Karen Lee, a public defender with over a decade of experience, described how Peterson often dismissed her motions without explanation. "It was demoralizing," she said, "but seeing Monica stand up to him, it gave me hope." The revelations also sparked a broader investigation into Atlanta's court system. A task force was formed to review cases presided over by Peterson and other judges accused of similar misconduct. The findings were staggering. Systemic bias wasn't limited to Peterson's courtroom. It was pervasive throughout the system. Monica became a reluctant hero, her name appearing in headlines and hashtags across the country. Justice in Atlanta and courtroom bias trended for weeks, sparking conversations about racial inequality in the justice system. But for Monica, the most meaningful moments came from the people she had inspired. She received letters and emails from young lawyers, law students, and community members, all thanking her for her courage. One letter in particular stood out. It was from a young black woman studying law at Spelman College. "You've shown me what it means to fight for justice," the letter read. "I hope to follow in your footsteps one day." Monica folded the letter carefully and placed it in her desk drawer. It was a reminder of why she had taken on this fight, not for recognition, but for the people who had been silenced for too long. The courtroom's reverberations didn't stop with Judge Harold Peterson's resignation. If anything, his downfall was merely the first crack in a dam that had long been holding back years of systemic bias and unchecked authority. The impact spread swiftly across Atlanta, shaking the city's judicial foundation and sending ripples far beyond its borders. Monica Bryant, who had become an unlikely public figure overnight, sat in her office in the federal building, staring out at the bustling city streets below. Her coffee had long gone cold, but she didn't mind. She was lost in thought, trying to process the whirlwind of change that had followed her testimony. Within weeks of the hearing, the Georgia Judicial Review Board released its findings. Systemic racial disparities in sentencing, fines, and judicial discretion plagued not only Judge Peterson's courtroom, but many others across Atlanta. The report's conclusion was scathing. The city's judicial system had failed its most vulnerable citizens. The backlash was immediate, and so were the calls for reform. The first major change came from the mayor's office, which announced the creation of mandatory bias training for all judges, court clerks, and bailiffs in the city. Monica was invited to attend the inaugural session as an observer, and she watched as the packed room of legal professionals sat through an unflinching seminar on implicit bias, cultural competency, and the devastating impact of racial disparities in the justice system. Sitting near the front of the room was James Wilson, the veteran bailiff who had served under Judge Peterson for years. During a break, he approached Monica. His usually stern expression softened. "You started this," he said, his voice tinged with both gratitude and respect, "and I'm proud to see it through." Beyond the training sessions, new community oversight committees were formed to monitor sentencing patterns. These committees included local activists, civil rights lawyers, and even former defendants like Tyrone Jenkins, who had been one of Peterson's victims. "I never thought I'd be sitting at a table like this, Tyrone said during the first committee meeting, but I'm here now, and I'm not letting anyone else go through what I did. Perhaps the most significant reform came in the form of new transparency laws for judicial campaign financing. No longer could judges like Peterson hide behind vague donations and shadowy alliances. Now, every dollar received and every donor's identity would be publicly accessible. This isn't just about fixing a broken system, Monica told a reporter. It's about ensuring that justice is truly blind, not influenced by race, income, or political connections. The weeks following the hearing weren't easy for Monica. The victory had come with its own set of challenges. She had faced criticism from some colleagues who thought she had gone too far and veiled hostility from others who believed she had disrupted the status quo. One night, alone in her apartment, Monica found herself scrolling through old photos on her phone. There were pictures of her law school graduation, her first day as a federal prosecutor, and candid shots of her family back in Atlanta's West End. Her journey hadn't been easy. She thought about the professors who had doubted her abilities, the colleagues who had underestimated her, and the countless moments of quiet frustration she had endured. But as she reflected on the impact of her fight, she realized that every struggle had prepared her for this moment. The letters and emails pouring into her office provided comfort on her hardest days. Many were from young women of color, aspiring lawyers who saw Monica as a beacon of hope. One letter in particular stood out. Dear Ms. Bryant, thank you for being the voice we didn't know we needed. You've shown me that it's possible to fight from within the system and still create real change. One day, I hope to stand where you are now and make a difference just like you did. With gratitude, Simone. Monica read the letter twice, her chest tightening with emotion. She placed it in a folder labeled Inspiration, a growing collection of notes she returned to whenever the weight of her work felt too heavy. Determined to pay it forward, Monica began mentoring young lawyers, particularly women of color. She met weekly with a group of law students from Spelman College, sharing her experiences and offering guidance. During one session, a student named Jada asked her a pointed question. How do you keep going when the system feels so stacked against you? Monica smiled faintly. By remembering that every step forward, no matter how small, makes the fight worth it, and by surrounding myself with people who believe in justice as much as I do. Monica's actions had sparked a movement that couldn't be contained within Atlanta. Civil rights groups across the country began to rally around her story, using it as a springboard to push for broader reforms. The Atlanta Justice Alliance, which had hosted Monica's initial press conference, launched a national campaign called Justice for All, advocating for similar oversight committees and transparency laws in other cities. Monica was invited to speak at rallies in Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Los Angeles, where her speeches drew thousands. Justice is not an abstract concept, she told a crowd in D.C. It's about how we treat every individual who walks into a courtroom. It's about recognizing that our biases, whether conscious or unconscious, have real consequences, and it's about committing to change, even when it's uncomfortable. Rebecca Sanders, the young public defender whose testimony had been critical in bringing down Peterson, also found herself emboldened by Monica's courage. Inspired by Monica's example, Rebecca filed her own lawsuit against Peterson, citing professional retaliation and a hostile work environment. It's not just about what he did to the defendants, Rebecca said in an interview. It's about the culture he created, a culture where people like me felt powerless to speak up. That has to change. Rebecca's lawsuit garnered widespread attention, further solidifying Peterson's tarnished legacy. It also sent a clear message to others in positions of power. Silence was no longer an option. As the reforms took root and the momentum continued to build, Monica found herself reflecting on how far things had come. 3 months after Peterson's resignation, she attended a ceremony at the Atlanta courthouse, where a new plaque had been installed in the lobby. The plaque read, "Justice is not about the law alone. It is about how we treat those who seek it. Below the inscription were the names of the Oversight Committee members, including Tyrone Jenkins and Rebecca Sanders. Monica stood quietly, her hands clasped in front of her, as a young girl approached her. "Are you Monica Bryant?" the girl asked shyly. Monica knelt down to meet her eyes. "Yes, I am. And what's your name?" "Jasmine," the girl replied. "I want to be a lawyer someday." Monica smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "You can be anything you want, Jasmine. And if you ever need help, I'll be right here." As Jasmine ran back to her family, Monica turned to Rebecca, who was standing nearby. "Did you ever think we'd see something like this?" Rebecca asked. Monica shook her head. "I hoped, and that hope is what kept me going." The two women stood side by side, watching as the next generation stepped into a world that, while still imperfect, was undeniably better because of their fight. The sun broke over Atlanta's skyline, casting its warm light across the city. For many, it was just another day, but for those who had felt the ripples of change over the past few months, it was a symbol of new beginnings. The city, once plagued by whispers of corruption and systemic inequity, was now emerging as a beacon of reform. The fight for justice, sparked by one woman's stand against a broken system, had grown into a movement that redefined what fairness looked like in the courts and beyond. The changes began with small but symbolic gestures. Walking into Atlanta's courthouses now felt different. Multilingual signage greeted visitors at the entrance, ensuring that everyone, regardless of language barriers, could navigate the legal system with confidence. At the clerk's office, a help desk staffed by community volunteers provided accessible legal resources, offering guidance to defendants who couldn't afford attorneys. Tyrone Jenkins, once a victim of Peterson's courtroom biases, was one of the volunteers. Wearing a crisp white shirt and a name tag that read Community Advocate, Tyrone greeted each visitor with the same warmth and respect he had once been denied. "I want people to know they're not alone," Tyrone said in an interview with the local news. "This courthouse doesn't just belong to the powerful. It belongs to all of us." Inside the courtrooms, equitable fine structures had replaced the arbitrary penalties that once disproportionately affected minority defendants. Community oversight committees continued to monitor rulings, ensuring accountability at every level. Atlanta's transformation didn't stop there. The city launched programs aimed at addressing the root causes of inequality. Educational workshops on tenants' rights, financial literacy, and community law were held monthly, often led by young lawyers inspired by Monica Bryant's story. In her office at the federal courthouse, Monica sat at her desk, staring at the framed parking ticket fine that now hung on the wall. It was the same 1,000 contempt fine Judge Peterson had issued months ago, but now it represented something far greater. Beneath the frame, she had added a small brass plaque that read, "Never underestimate the power of standing up." Her office had become a gathering place for young lawyers seeking guidance, reporters wanting updates, and community leaders hoping to collaborate on new initiatives. Monica, once reluctant to step into the spotlight, had become a national figure in the fight for judicial reform. Invitations poured in from across the country. Law schools asked her to lecture. Civil rights groups wanted her at their rallies, and legal panels sought her expertise. Despite her growing prominence, Monica remained grounded. She continued her work as a federal prosecutor, focusing on cases that fought corruption and protected vulnerable communities. One day, Angela entered Monica's office, holding a sleek envelope embossed with the logo of the National Civil Rights Coalition. "You've been asked to deliver the keynote speech at their annual event," Angela said, her tone tinged with excitement. Monica raised an eyebrow. "The national one? That's big. It's huge," Angela corrected her. "You've earned this, Monica." The evening of the keynote speech arrived, and Monica found herself backstage at a packed auditorium in downtown Atlanta. The crowd buzzed with energy. Activists, legal professionals, students, and everyday citizens had come to hear her story. As the MC introduced her, Monica took a deep breath. Stepping onto the stage, she was greeted by a standing ovation. The spotlight felt warm, but Monica's focus was on the faces in the audience. She began her speech with a story, her own. She spoke about the parking ticket that had brought her to Judge Peterson's courtroom and the injustice she had witnessed there. She detailed the systemic biases she uncovered and the courage it had taken to expose them. But this isn't just my story, Monica said, her voice resonating through the auditorium. It's the story of every person who has ever walked into a courtroom and felt invisible. It's the story of communities that have been ignored for far too long. And it's the story of what happens when we decide enough is enough. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. I've learned that justice isn't just about laws or courtrooms. It's about people. It's about resilience, solidarity, and the belief that change is possible, even when the odds are against us. Monica's voice grew stronger as she addressed the next generation. To the young lawyers, the law students, and the activists in this room, you are the future. You have the power to shape a system that works for everyone, not just the privileged few. Don't wait for permission to make a difference. Start now. Start where you are. The audience erupted into applause as Monica concluded her speech. Tears filled her eyes as she looked out at the sea of faces, each one reflecting hope, determination, and gratitude. As she stepped off the stage, Rebecca Sanders was there to greet her. The young public defender had been instrumental in exposing Peterson's corruption, and now she was leading efforts to bring similar reforms to neighboring cities. You were incredible, Rebecca said, hugging Monica tightly. Monica smiled, her heart full. We did this together. In the months that followed, Monica's story continued to inspire change. Cities across the country adopted Atlanta's reforms, implementing oversight committees, bias training, and equitable sentencing practices. Law schools added courses on systemic bias and judicial ethics to their curriculums, ensuring that the next generation of lawyers would be better equipped to challenge injustice. Back in Atlanta, a group of law students from Spelman College visited Monica's office. They presented her with a framed photo of the city's new courthouse lobby, where a plaque had been installed in her honor. It read, "To Monica Bryant, whose courage reminded us that justice belongs to everyone." Monica placed the photo next to her framed parking ticket fine. The two symbols side by side told the story of a woman who had turned a moment of injustice into a movement for change. And though her journey was far from over, Monica knew she wouldn't be walking it alone. If this powerful story of courage and resilience inspired you, let us know by hitting that like button and sharing your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in Monica's shoes? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that celebrate bravery, equality, and the fight for what's right. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.